Alright guys, so start by having your fog light thoroughly cleaned, and then what I did there, what I'm outlining is that I had put knifeless tape along the edge of the fog light. The next thing you see, I have a piece already cut out that's big enough to cover the entire fog light, to cover left, right, up, and down, and I just double checked to make sure that I did have full coverage. From there you can see that I'm peeling off the backing paper from the vinyl tint, and then I'm going to carefully place it over the fog light area. Kind of center it so that you have about equal space all the way around. Now you see I have a lot of excess that goes out into the body of the car itself, and that's so that I have areas to hold on to, because you do not want to get your fingers behind the area you're going to apply the vinyl to, because those fingerprints will show up. So what I did there is that I kind of tacked down about in the center, and then I'm working my way up to the upper edge and laying down that vinyl onto the fog light. Now that I've got that, I'm just starting to work that center part there and then start to work it down. You can see I almost put my hand underneath, but what I'm doing there is pulling things up because I found a little wrinkle that I wanted to take out before putting the rest of the vinyl down. There's a slight curve as you head down towards the bottom and the back, and so you can see how the vinyl is making kind of a half moon shape there. I'm just kind of following that around, working the vinyl down to the edges there, as you can see, using my squeegee. Getting up to the top, you can see, and then over to the sides, I'm just using my finger, between my finger and my squeegees, different things to help work that vinyl up to the edges there. And that's the goal, work it to the edges as stress-free as possible. I'm at a point where I can cut off some of the excess to hold on to, because I'm at a point where I don't necessarily need that much. That being said, I probably could have started off with a slightly smaller piece, but I was just being safer than sorry, and so now I'm just getting rid of some of the excess, because as you could tell, or as you saw there, it started binding up too much on the body of the car, and so I needed to trim off some of and it's starting to fight me, so I needed to start to trim those off as I'm now at the edges of the fog light in this case. So just being careful to cut the edges off, or the excess off, without cutting too far in, because I want to leave some left for me to be able to hold still, but not too much that it'll bind up on the body of the car. Once I've trimmed it off, I'm continuing on, and I'm just using right now my finger to make sure everything's smooth all the way up to the top. Super easy. Reaching over for my heat gun to start adding just a little bit of heat to help relax things and find air bubbles and soften the vinyl to make it more pliable and compliant. As you see, I'm using low, I added some heat down to the bottom right of the fog light where there was a little bit of wrinkling, and you saw those wrinkles just disappear. And then I'm doing the same on the left side. Now, with this, I'm using low heat on my heat gun because the fog light does have a plastic housing, so you don't want to subject it to extreme heat, especially concentrated heat. So use low heat when doing this. Basically, you're warming up the vinyl to relax it and make it a little bit softer so you can mold it around and manipulate it as you need to, which is exactly what I'm doing there. After I warmed up the vinyl, got rid of some of those wrinkles to relax the edges, I'm now just molding it while it's still soft and a little bit warm to the edges, and making a good, make sure I have good contact and coverage over my knifeless tape line in this case, which is where I want to get to as stress-free as possible on the edges of the vinyl so that I can cut it. Now, you don't have to use knifeless tape. What you could do is work all the way to the edges, make sure you relax the vinyl as you get to the edges there, and then trim the vinyl off on the edges using the edge of the fog light as your cut guide, basically putting the side or the flat part of the blade on the side of the fog light housing, and then use that to trim off the excess. You could wrap all the way in and around, but that's, in my opinion, just excess work that's not necessary. I'm just covering the face of this because that's all you need. That's where the light portion actually comes through and the most visible part. You start wrapping back into the over the casing itself, way in there. You just start to bind up the vinyl. It gets into be a very, very tight space and area. Can cause wrinkles and just makes your life harder when just doing this causes or does the exact same thing. And unless you get right up in front of the vinyl or in front of the fog light, you are not going to notice it. So I'm just continuing on to make sure that I've got full coverage, and I'm getting to my knifeless tape line, which is just on the inside edge of the headlight, or excuse me, the fog light housing. That way I have just a little bit over the edge, but that's about it. Maybe a 1/16 of an inch, 1 to 2 millimeters at that. Again, I don't want to go too far back because it's just too much. It just makes it more difficult, and in my opinion, not necessarily worth the extra effort for basically no gain or even aesthetic appeal. You can see that I'm working the corners a little bit just to make sure that I have full coverage in corners, and then that they're molded around, and that way it'll be nice and smooth and clean when I cut around the corner, or when I pull the knifeless tape around the corner there. Now I get everything to the edges. I'm sealing everything down onto the knifeless tape, making sure that it's on very well so that the cut itself will be effortless. Because if you do have wrinkles or binding over the knifeless tape, that's where when you're pulling a knifeless tape filament, it tends to bind up and can create an uneven or jagged cut, or it can pull the vinyl up off of the surface that you're trying to apply the vinyl to. So I'm just taking a little bit extra time now that I've pressed everything, giving it some more heat, make sure everything is pressed down nice and tight. I personally do take a little bit of extra time to double and triple check all my settings, everything that is set down, to make sure that everything is good for the actual cut. Because once you cut the vinyl, whether with a knife or with knifeless tape, and you mess up, that's pretty much game over. You may be able to fix it a little bit, but depending on how much it damages it, you just have to start over. Now that I got everything set, I'm getting ready to pull the knifeless tape, as you can see, breaking the filament away from the carrier tape, or at least trying to. Make sure you pull the correct one, because if you pull one that's underneath another knifeless tape overlay, you'll cut the knifeless tape at a point where you don't need it to be cut, and then you're going to have to redo the whole thing. If I recall correctly, as I was doing this, the knifeless tape broke a little bit earlier than anticipated, and so I had to make a small slit there to relieve it so I can get an additional measure of knifeless tape to break it from the carrier tape, the filament from the carrier tape, and then get the knifeless tape going. As you can see, I was able to get started there, and I'm peeling a knifeless tape, or pulling a knifeless tape filament through the vinyl, which is cutting the vinyl as it goes through, following the contour and shape. When I reach that corner, I put my finger over it as I was pulling it to make sure that nothing gets lifted and that it makes that corner nice and cleanly. I'm at the very end of it now, so I'm just, again, putting my finger over the corner to hold the knifeless tape and the vinyl down as it pulls and cuts the vinyl underneath without snagging or pulling anything else up. Now that I've done that, I'm pulling off the excess vinyl and at least one of the green carrier tape pieces. You'll have two slivers of green carrier tape, one that was on the outside, and then one that's going to be just underneath the vinyl area that you just cut, because the filament basically slices the carrier tape in half as you do that. When you pull the carrier tape that's underneath the vinyl, make sure you pull at a low angle, if possible. Sometimes, as you can see across the top, there's that it's kind of tucked in, so you can't pull it straight out, if you will. So you can see I'm kind of using my finger to guide it out, and then on the bottom it's easier because it's nice and open with plenty of space to do so. As I get towards the right side there, I just try to make sure my angle is pulling out instead of up. That way you don't lift the vinyl too much. Once I've got rid of all the rest of the carrier tape that's underneath, you'll have a slightly loose edge of the vinyl that you just did. So what I'm going to do here is hit everything with a little bit of low heat, and that will cause the vinyl that's been lifted up slightly from the carrier tape removal to settle back down. And then once it's been settled down, and basically it should, most of it just basically drop back down onto the vinyl, I'm using my my glove and my squeegee to then make sure all those edges are peeled down. I have my glove ready, so I can use that just to wipe it down. You can use your glove, your squeegee, your finger, whatever you feel is appropriate or necessary to make sure that you seal those edges down nice and tightly. And so that's all I'm doing right now. I'm paying particular attention to the corner pieces there to make sure they are down, molded around nicely so that they're nice and smooth. And then you can see now I'm using my my wrap glove to smooth everything down across the top side there. And then again on the bottom side to smooth everything down, make sure all those edges are pressed down nice and tightly so that there's no lifting and that you have a good seal. Okay, once I've done that, just hit everything over again with heat to make sure those edges are sealed down. Once you've pressed them down, they seal down nice and tightly. Vvivid is a heat activated adhesive, so adding heat basically makes their adhesive grab harder and set, and so you'll want to give it a good heating afterwards. Again, be careful, I'm using low heat and moving the heat gun the entire time so that I don't concentrate heat on any one area. Go over the surface too to see if you can find any air bubbles that you might have missed. But in particular, you can see I'm going over those edges to make sure everything's set. And now I'm going over the front surface area to find any bubbles that I might have missed. If you find any, you should let it cool a little bit, then try to press it out. If they won't, you had a poker and poke tiny little holes to do that. And so this fog light is fully wrapped, guys. I'm going to take the camera and just bring it a little bit closer so you can see up and close and check it out. Hopefully you found this video to be helpful and instructive, and so you can see that it's fairly easy to tint your fog lights. Even something that's like this is mildly a little bit more difficult than just say a really flat circle piece. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Thanks, guys.